Okay, in this lesson, you're going to be doing a review of the present tense. Now, we're not going to go through how to conjugate an AR, ER, IR verb, and all of that. Okay, those are things that you've already learned and you've practiced many, many times. What I'm going to do is give you a general overview as to the regular conjugation, stem changing verbs, verbs with an irregular yo, and irregular verbs. Then we're going to get into some particularities, which I'm going to show you with these verbs that you haven't learned in Spanish 101 and 102. Okay, so starting out with your page, the actual page where you're doing the present tense review, we start out with a review of regular verbs, just AR, ER, and IR, and their corresponding endings. Then you have your common regular verbs here, stem changing verbs that go E to IE, O to UE, and E to I. Then you have your irregular yo verbs that have a yo form that either has a go in it, or verbs like saber that have se, or conocer with conozco. Then you have your irregular verbs like ser, estar, and ir, whose conjugations just kind of do their own thing. Now, recommendations for practicing all of these verbs. Okay, this is just a question of practice. So what you're going to do, we've given you guys some practice in Quizlet, also conjugation practice for you to practice these conjugations. Okay, now, what about verbs that have spelling changes? This is where we get into something a little bit new. You haven't learned this yet. So for example, verbs that have a GER in them, like proteger, when we do the yo form, the G changes into J, protejo. If we do not change the G to J and leave it as a G, it would be pronounced protego, which is not consistent with the infinitive. Seguir, we actually drop that U out and we put your O ending, sigo. Convencer, to convince. When we conjugate the yo form, we have to change the C into a Z. This is opposite to things that you've learned. You've learned how to change Z's into C's. Well, now you're doing the opposite. You're doing C into Z. Okay, so it's convenzo. And the reason why we do that is the same as protejo. If we leave the Z as a C, it ends up being convenco, which is not consistent with the sound in convencer. And then verbs that have a UIR, like contribuir, we actually add a Y into the conjugation, contribuyo. So those are some particularities and irregularities that you see. Now, here's where we get into some really fun stuff. Verbs that have IAR and UAR. Now, this is a little bit difficult of a concept because this is essentially memorization practice. So verbs like cambiar, pronunciar, envidiar, and odiar, when you conjugate them, you just simply add your ending. Drop the AR and add an O, cambio, pronuncio, envidio, odio. But some verbs like vaciar, to empty, esquiar, to ski, espiar, to spy, and resfriarse, to catch a cold, when you do the conjugations, you actually have to add an accent on the I. So let me show you an example of this on my handy dandy whiteboard. Okay, so I'm going to take the verb vaciar, to empty. Okay, when I do the yo form, I drop the AR off, right? So I would go like this. Here's the problem. The way this verb is structured, you actually have to, and the way you pronounce it, you have to put an accent on the I. So it's going to be vacío instead of vacío, vacío, vacías, vacía. But nosotros, we do not do that. Vaciamos, no accent on the I. Vacían. And the other IAR verbs in that list are done exactly the same way. You put the accents on the I, except for nosotros. This is a pronunciation particularity. It doesn't follow any kind of pattern. It's something that needs to be memorized and practiced. Okay, let's go back to the other, let's go back to the Canvas page here really quick. Let's talk about verbs with UAR. This is also kind of interesting. So for example, we have disambiguar, to disambiguate. I can't speak English, okay? Aguar, to dilute or to spoil. Desaguar. Amortiguar. Okay? These differ from verbs like continuar, graduarse, situar, and evaluar. With these verbs, you don't add any kind of accent. But for example, continuar, graduarse, situar, and evaluar, you have to put an accent on the U. Let me show you. Okay. Let us share the whiteboard. Okay, let me show you how this works. All right, so let's take continuar, to continue. Oh, I can't type. All right, so your tendency will be to drop the AR and add an O, right? The way this is pronounced, it would be pronounced continuo, okay? Because the stress would naturally be on the I, but it is pronounced continuo. Now, U and O is a diphthong. It is one syllable in Spanish, so we have to break that syllable up. And the way we do it is by putting an accent on the U. Continuo, continuas, continua. But nosotros, we do not add the accent. Continuamos, continúan. Okay, so the verbs that are on that list, again, need to be memorized and practiced, and we provide the practice for you guys with those. So those are some new peculiarities about present tense conjugation that you did not learn in Spanish 101. Okay, when we add the yo, when we go to the yo form, add the change the G to a J, change the C to a Z, add a Y, and then we have these verbs where we put accents in the I or the U in the yo form, and it's kind of random, somewhat. Well, there's a reason behind it, but you know, you don't need to take a linguistics class in order to find that out. These just require practice. And that's basically that. So go ahead and go on to the practice, and then we've got some practice activities for you guys to do.